Welcome to Life at Home with yet another presentation of family ministries. And today we want to really understand what God is trying to do with us in our families. I'm your host, Dr. Eugene Franch. And as we once again look at the concepts of what God says concerning marriage and family, we want to look at two key elements throughout this second series. That element of love, what it really means, and the element too of relationships. For we are creatures of relationships. The Bible is a unique book. And this book here gives us many, many principles of how we can live our marriages and family to give glory to God. And so throughout our presentations, and this one especially, we want to look at God's word. What does it say also concerning marriage and the family? This book here is a book that we can learn much from each day. I encourage you, daily find God's gems and principles concerning your marriage. Our presentation today is entitled Viva La Difference. What does that mean? It means celebrating our differences as man and wife, celebrating our differences as a husband and a wife, celebrating our differences because we are different in marriage. And because of that, we communicate differently, we understand things differently. So come with me as we begin to understand the unique differences that make up a husband and the unique differences that make up a wife. Before I get into our differences, I've got a beautiful marriage gem for the husband and the wife. It says this: all marriages are happy, and it's the living together afterward that causes all the trouble. When we think about this, how true it is that all marriages are happy, but trying to live together is another dimension. Why? Because I'm a man and she's a woman, and we do things differently. We understand things differently. We need to understand one thing, and that is that the way we think and the way we act is different. And this alone helps us to understand why there's so much conflict and tension in many marriages. As we look at our differences, we want to look at communication in a key way. For how many times have you been misunderstood by your wife or your husband? It all boils down to your communication style as a wife and as a husband. Let me give you a quotation here of a beautiful principle. One marriage counselor, and I think his name was Dr. Norman Wright, on a book that he wrote, he said communication is the key to your marriage. And I want to say, yes, the key to any successful relationship is good communication. How often we misinterpret our communication in the home. And yet when we meet strangers, yet when we meet people of importance, we are careful in how we speak, the tone of our voice, and also how we reflect our body language. But at home, life at home, we begin to disregard good communication. And I want to let you know that many conflicts can be resolved in this one area, taking care of the way you communicate. One profound biblical writer wrote these words. She said that marriage is important, and to gain a proper understanding of marriage is the work of a lifetime. Those who marry enter a school from which they are never in this life to be graduated. However careful and wisely marriage may have been entered into, few couples are completely united when the marriage ceremony is performed. The real union of the two in wedlock is the work of the after years. An interesting quotation. You will never graduate from marriage, but it is a lifelong school in which, yes, there's no graduation date. And she said these words, that at the marriage altar, the two are not completely united, but only after the years of living together do they begin to actually understand each other. Marriage is like two rivers coming together. Two different rivers traveling at different speeds. Two rivers that have different surroundings that make up the way it flows and the way it looks and smells even. two rivers coming together. And you know, when two rivers come together and mesh, it's very difficult to swim at that spot. There's tension, there's turmoil, there's an upheaval. And so it is. Husband and wife coming together at the altar, merging together. And after the first few years of marriage, yes, there is tension. Yes, there is strife. And a kilometer down that merged river, you'll find that its banks are broader. The river is not traveling as fast as it was before as two single rivers. There's a sense of depth. There's a sense of harmony. There is a sense of peace as you see that river now become one and more beautiful than when they were two. And so marriage truly is something that we'll never graduate from. We need to understand communication is important. How many times do we find problems in a marriage because of wrong communication? Between husband and wife, wrong communication, there's strife. Between the job that you go to, many times when a man is at a job where he is engaged with a woman, the communication aspect sometimes causes much of the conflict. And that's how important communication is in the home, between wife and husband, and in relationships in society with other women. And also when it comes to that beautiful area in the home of sexual intimacy and fulfillment, communication is important. Well, let's look at the differences that make up the way we speak. And I want to spend maybe one or two other presentations explaining this in a key way. But I want to give you a broad outline in this presentation. Differences I want to talk about in communication, our style, differences in the way we listen. Did you know that a wife listens differently to how a husband listens whenever we talk? We want to look at those key areas. And also, we want to look at some other key dimensions that make up a man concerning communication. God's word speaks about it. If you look carefully, you'll begin to find it. Well, what are the differences between a man and a woman? What are the key differences when it comes to communication between a wife and a husband? Well, one key difference I noticed in my marriage is that a woman speaks more quickly than a man. And this is something interesting that many men fail to understand. A man speaks more slowly than a woman. There is something about a woman's makeup, the way God created her, that whenever she speaks, she can speak so fluently, so quickly, so fast, very expressively. Whereas a man, however, very many of them, there are some that speak just like a woman, but mostly men take their time in communicating and speaking slowly. And because of this, that can create conflict in a marriage. Because of this, a man may feel that his wife is just rushing on with things, but he needs to give his wife time to finish what she's saying. And when the wife listens to him, she thinks, why can't he talk more quickly and tell me what he's thinking? Communication differences is a big one in this area. Husbands, allow your wife to talk as much as she is. That's the way God made her. And wives, be patient with your husband. As he talks, listen very carefully. Another difference is that when a woman speaks, she gives a dramatic account of the event. And this is interesting. She varies her voice tones and pauses and uses expressions when she talks. The man, however, speaks in facts without going into detail, and without resorting to drama as he talks. This is a major difference. In other words, a wife speaks in detail and a husband speaks in facts. How many times have you been in the conversation of other couples and a story is being told and the wife is telling the story and oh my, she begins now to experience that event. She begins to go into detail. She doesn't start at the event. She starts in the morning, and yet the event took place in the afternoon. She gives an account of the day and how she felt. Her feelings come up, her tone of her voice, the expression in her eyes even. And the husband is quietly getting impatient. In his mind, he's saying, come on, wife, go to the main event. Come on, wife, just tell what has happened, because he knows he's getting impatient. And so it is with a man. If he has to tell the same event or story, he will just go straight to the facts. He will tell you that it is in the shortest possible time that he as a man can speak, not go into much detail unless it's asked for. This is a beautiful difference that needs to be cultivated between husband and wife in marriage. It becomes an irritation sometimes when you don't understand. But this is how God created women. This is how God created a man. We need to accept these differences and begin to understand that we are different even in the way we communicate. Another difference that we have with men and women is that a woman tends to be dominated by the right side of the brain, mostly. And that is the emotional side. Our brain is divided into two hemispheres, the right side and the left side. And it is told by those psychologists and brain doctors that when they study the human brain, the right side of the human brain is the emotional side of our makeup. The left side is our thinking, logical part. A woman mostly uses the right side. Her emotions come out in the way she talks, the way she lives, the way she walks, but especially in the way she communicates, the emotional side. The man, however, uses much of the left part of the brain, the logical part of the brain. And that logical part is steps in order to achieve something in the shortest period possible. That understands why men speak in facts and why women speak in detail. For a man tends to be dominated, listen carefully, by his left brain, the logic part, and a woman by her right side of her brain, the emotional part mostly. Different ways of expressing something. And that's what makes us different when it comes to communication. There's another difference too we need to notice, is that when a woman talks, she prefers, yes, to speak about people, to speak about relationships, and also to speak about the feelings that people experience. Notice this. She wants to have an experience when she talks, using her emotional side. When the husband begins to talk of the same aspect, he just prefers to speak about things. He just speaks about the events and the facts without going into the feelings of the people or the surroundings of the events. And that is why women speak in detail. That's why a woman can talk the whole day and not get tired. It is the way God made her. I listened up to one husband who said, Pastor, if only my wife can be quiet for a while, there'll be peace at home. He did not understand the makeup of a woman, of how God made her. To her, conversation, to her, talking was a desperate need in her life that she needed constantly. He was a very quiet, a very shy type of guy. He liked the peace and quiet of the surroundings. And here was a wife, talkative. Here was a wife who constantly loved to just hear her own voice. But in reality, she wanted her husband to communicate with her. And so when a woman talks, she talks about the experiences of a person. As she talks, she begins to analyze it as well. A man just talks of the facts and the events that take place. Another difference between men and women in communication is that the wife tends to stay on the topic of conversation until it is exhausted. That's interesting. A man, however, may take a short time and talk about something and change the topic of conversation rather rapidly. This is a different way of communicating. Yes, when a woman talks, she'll stay on the subject and exhaust the subject until she has said everything she wants to say. The experience, what she saw, what she felt, what she observed in the other person. She will stay on that topic until she feels she's exhausted it. The man will just speak it in factual tones and then move on to another topic. But she will want to linger on it, and you just be in the crowd of women. and begin to find out that they can spend such a long time talking of one small event, and yet you want to get off the subject and talk of other things. But that's how God made women. And when women listen to men, they hope that there would be more detail in what they say. They get upset when they don't explain things properly. And so for both, we need to have patience. Patience to allow God to use us to speak in the manner that He has created us. Another difference I want to share with you is that a woman frequently uses plural terms of her connection with things. Our family, our children, our home. She embraces these things in a unique way. However, a man, when you hear him speaks mostly in the singular term. This is interesting. What do we mean by the singular term? Well, he'll refer to it not as our home, but he'll say, my house, my car. These are my children. And yet the wife is standing right next to him over here. You begin to see how men isolate things because of the logical way of thinking. And a woman, because of an emotional side, wants to embrace everything. No, it's not. It's not my children, it's our children, because you, husband, also are a part of this child as well. This is a unique difference. Sometimes take stock when you are listening in the crowd to men and women, and even in your own home when you're listening to your spouse speak. You will begin to find out that these things come out rather frequently, naturally, but they can be a cause of tension in a real way. Well, when you look at that, we find that another experience here is she frequently reveals her own experience. When a wife talks, she wants to experience and tell others how she felt at that event. She will speak about her own feelings. She will speak about her own emotions. She will speak about even the feelings of how she felt. She would like the man that she loves, probably many times in the closeness of their connection together in the home, to be more open, to express his feelings more to her, because she is, after all, his wife. Although he may be closed, although he may not want to express his feelings to those outside, many a wife needs to carefully allow her husband in many different ways to show his true feelings when he's feeling extremely happy, but more so when he's feeling hurt, when he's feeling he's been wounded, when he's feeling somehow that he's fearful about something. A wise wife will know just the right environment to bring it about, to allow her man not to be just cold, as many wives say, but rather in a key way to allow her husband to express his feelings, just like she in her emotions. When you look at the differences, a lot has to do with how God made the man and woman. A woman, yes, if you can say it in these terms concerning the brain, she is right brain oriented. The emotional part comes out mostly. A man uses his left brain in thinking, the logical part of his brain. And so he speaks in that term. It is the way God made us. We cannot change it. And even though we have different personalities, even a man is full of laughter, we also mostly use the logical part of our brains. Let us switch over just briefly and look at another sense of communication differences. And this is the way we listen to each other. If you did not know it before, but the way a wife listens to anyone, but more so her husband, she experiences it differently to another man hearing the same thing. And when a husband listens to his wife, he will interpret what he's listening to in different ways as well. It's all because we are men and we are women, male and female, different ways of receiving those communication thoughts that is expressed. One key one here is that a human uses plenty of attention indicators by nodding her head, by smiling, by phrases of yes, I can understand. A woman will constantly show that in her expression when a man is talking to her or another woman. However, the man or the husband, he uses attention indicators very sparingly. A man can sit there and just be in the zero mode, if you can call it. He can just be not expressive at all. While his wife is bubbling over, he can just sit there and look at her. And she may think, is he excited about what I'm saying? But this is the way we listen. This is the way a man listens. Yes, a man is not so expressive as the woman, and we need to understand that in marriage. Another difference in the way men and women listen is that a woman loves to maintain eye contact. A man will maintain eye contact now and again. But a woman, because of her emotional side that comes out, she will maintain eye contact with those she speaks to far more longer than a man would. And that's why many times when a woman speaks to her husband, when a wife is sitting down and talking to her hubby, she will look him in the eye with smiles and twinkles, and she expects him to look back at her. But he won't even look so much back at her unless he is in a very loving, romantic way, and those feelings will come out in him. But mostly, he will look at her and then look down a bit and look away, but he's listening. And she may think, is he listening to me? No, it's the way God made us as men and women. Another difference in the way men and women listen to each other is this one here, is that she interprets attention indicators as a sign of interest. When she speaks, and especially when she listens to someone, the indicator she gets from that person is signs of interest. He's interested in our conversation. He's talking, and he's interested also to what I've just said. These are signs of interest that she experiences it. To the man, attention indicators is a sign of agreement. You can understand now what's happening as we listen and process what we are listening to. To her, it's interest. To him, it's a sign of agreement. And that's why we can get into conflict many times. If we don't carefully tell the person, especially those of the opposite sex, what we are exactly saying to each other. Here's another difference. She waits for pauses to ask questions. Whenever they are talking, a wife will wait for a pause of the husband, and then suddenly she will then ask a question if she needs to. However, the husband, on the other hand, will not wait for a pause, but he is likely to interrupt her while she's talking, going on and on. He will just quiet in his quiet nature, just interrupt her and asks a question when he thinks it's valid. She may think he's being rude, especially at the workplace. This is how men and women communicate, especially men. As she's talking, he may interrupt her, and she may think, let me finish. But this is the way God made us. Men tend to interrupt a person when they speak to ask a question. It is the way that God has made us as men. A woman, well, she, on the other hand, will wait for the pause, being polite as most women are, and then ask a question. This is an interesting difference, a difference that can cause conflict in many homes, in many marriages. Conflict not only in the home, but conflict also in the workplace and in the general surroundings. So be careful how you speak to the opposite sex, especially be aware of how they're listening to you. Well, here's one last one in the way men and women listen. She stops any activity to listen. Whereas a man, often listens while doing something else. When it comes to a woman and communication, many women will stop briefly, look at the person, get eye contact, and listen to what they say. A husband, however, may continue doing something, but he's listening carefully. He may not give the eye contact that she's wanting from him, but he is probably doing something else and he's listening. This is a big difference. This can also be a source of conflict that many a wife, especially with a husband when she's talking to him. I noticed this carefully. Not so much with my wife, but when my beautiful daughter was born, and she was at an age 3 or 4 years old one day. I was sitting there in my study, and I was busy beginning to work on my sermons, and she came into the study, and she wanted to tell me something, and I looked at her and smiled at her, and I said, "Go ahead, sweetheart, tell me what you're saying." And I was seated there, and she was looking up at me, and she was busy talking, but my eyes then focused back to what I was quickly finishing a letter, I think. And then suddenly my daughter did something to me. She then came and took her hand and placed it on my face and turned it from my laptop so that it could face her, so that I could have eye-to-eye contact with her. I then realized the difference. Whenever a man talks to a woman, she would want eye-to-eye contact. Friends, family, husbands, wives, at this time, how do you talk in your home, at work, and in your surroundings? Take note of these key indicators in a real way. I want to end off this by saying these words. Communication is so key. There is much more we could say on the subject of the key differences, but that's for another presentation. The Apostle Peter tells us here in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 17, an interesting comment that he mentions. He says these words here: "Husbands, likewise dwell with your wives with understanding, giving honor to her as the weaker vessel." Notice what he's saying. Husbands, dwell with understanding with your wife. What is he saying? Another interpretation could be, husbands, take time to understand this interesting, beautiful creature called wife, called woman. She is loving, but she's different. Take time to understand her. And the way understand means understand her nature. When it comes to communication, learn how a woman communicates. And in that way, you'll be able to process your information carefully. And she may not have conflict. This can also take place with the wife. Learn how a man understands, how he thinks, how he interprets what is being said. For we are men and women, two different creatures, but bonded together in love, in matrimony, and in marriage. May your communication style in your home take on a much brighter, a much joyful way from henceforth as you begin to understand your differences as well as your wife's differences when it comes to communication. Why? Because communication is the key to a successful marriage.